It's a busy time of the year for admissions folks, right? I get that. I recognize that. And I just want to acknowledge all of the good work that you're doing. Many of you with application deadlines that have just passed or that are upcoming in the next few weeks. So just definitely appreciative that you are taking, even if it's just 45 minutes for our discussion today, to join in the discussion because of the importance and the connection with admissions. As you just heard Alicia from our colleague from the Dana Center share just a few minutes ago, it's important for admissions to understand this impact, and even more important for admissions to kind of start working through what some of that impact may be. And that's what today's session is designed for. As I was collaborating with colleagues, excuse me, at the Ohio Department of Education, regarding content for this session, they said, Mark, we really need some good input from the admissions folks, from the admissions colleagues, so that we can best prepare students and families and counselors moving forward. Now, our colleagues, our higher education advising colleagues, are meeting with school counselors in that breakout session. So they're going to bring that unique perspective about the advising component and how school counselors can start preparing. We're hoping that in our discussion, we're going to be able to work on building out a little bit of the FAQ that the Ohio Department of Education has launched so that we can be inclusive of any of those admission specific perspectives and questions that may be on the radar and that may be coming up here in the immediate future. So my involvement in this math pathways discussion really started about just over 2 years ago, when a colleague from the Department of Higher Education reached out and said, there's this new state initiative that's happening. We would love to have just a perspective of somebody that works in undergraduate admissions across the many institutions in Ohio. And my name was recommended. And so I have been working with the Advisory Council for the past 2 years on this Math Pathways initiative. There's been a lot of learning in that. And most recently, there's been some more important learning that's taken place because of now the timeline that we're on and some of the additional work that's taken place. It's been a really great pleasure to be able to engage with colleagues from the School Counselor Association and from the Architects Group, math faculty members, from the Ohio Parent Teacher Association, and many organizations. And it's been great to be able to bring an admissions perspective to say, some of these items need to be on our radar. So again, we're going to be going through a little bit more of that in our discussion over the next few minutes. In the chat, if you could take a moment just to include the institution, the admissions office, perhaps if you are an admissions office that you represent. If you are joining and you're not in an admissions office, that's okay too. Please just let me know where you're from so that if I can tailor any of this information, certainly happy to try to tailor that information based off of the folks who are joining us. Pamela, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining the session. A good colleague from an organization that I've been introduced to through this work. Thanks for joining us. And Becky, former colleague from the Department of Higher Ed, thank you as well. So I'm calling out folks that I know are not directly in admissions, but please, again, feel free to, in the chat, just include where you are. And again, we'll try to make this as productive for all of you as possible. So through our discussion today, this is really kind of what our breakout session will look like. We are going to take a moment to look at the FAQ, and I'm going to look to all of you to help us build out maybe a few questions of that FAQ. I also want to make sure you're aware of the toolkit that's out there. There are so many great resources that have just recently been released by the Ohio Department of Education, and really want to make sure that you are aware of these resources. I'm sure, like our office, we have already received to the admissions office many questions from school counselors. It's now great that we're going to be able to reference these toolkits as a place for them to go to find some of the information that admissions offices may not be directly responsible for. I did reach out to a number of colleagues in admissions over the past few weeks and said, what's on the top of your mind as we're thinking about preparing the session, as we're considering which content is top of mind for you? What needs to be covered and where do we need to give people the space to have a discussion around? And one of the items that consistently was submitted by our colleagues in admissions was an idea around how does equity impact admissions? Of course, the entire symposium, if you've been participating, has really been focused on equity, and especially the last keynote and the keynote yesterday evening really focused on equity as well. But equity can be approached in a number of ways, and the approach that's out there right now, I'd like to make sure that you're aware of that, and again, give you the opportunity to provide some of that feedback for the Department of Education on what those areas of improvement can be. And then we'll walk through some impacts and of course cover the timeline and the most likely time that this is going to impact the work in admissions. So let's take a look at the FAQ and toolkit review. I am still learning how to use the platform that we're in, so offer me some grace as I am navigating some of the chat that's coming in and some of the additional components. But as we are looking at the current FAQ via the toolkit that the Department of Education has released, there is a really nice draft and there are a number of questions that are out there already. One of the items that you're going to notice is that it is SANS admission specific information and doesn't include really any information about admissions. The topics that are covered, and we'll look at these in a little more detail, graduation requirements, advising and counseling, implementation, and then kind of an other broad-based category, are really important and are important components, but they're the kind of initial components that students or families or school administrators may be looking at or may be considering. So our goal in this conversation really is to say, what should we be including from the admissions perspective? What are those important components that are going to be top of mind for our colleagues from the admissions space who may be going to this space as a resource or who may be directing students to this space as a resource? So let's take a little bit deeper dive into the current FAQ. Now, these are the questions that are there. The responses are on the toolkit already, but you'll see that I didn't include those just as a measure to try to save some space. So the first category is graduation requirements. So very specific to students, but I think also important because as our admission offices are evaluating students for admission, especially if you're not an open access institution, what are those requirements that students are going to be providing now? Can a student earn an honors diploma? Perhaps that's part of one of the elements of your review based off of that Algebra 2. How do students earn SEALs? Now, at Ohio State, the SEALs are not part of our evaluation, but some of you may be considering that. So hopefully you're also considering that impact as part of your evaluation of students. There's a really large section built around advising and counseling. And again, our colleagues in higher education advising and school counselors are having a similar discussion to this right now in one of the other breakout rooms. But important for us to consider, are there any areas of crossover? Of course, we do a lot of great work to try to hand off students successfully. So are there areas of crossover in this section that we need to be aware of or that we need to weigh into? So rather than read through every one of these questions, I'm going to leave this slide up for just a few more moments, but we'll definitely also provide you access to where the location is so that you can look at this after our discussion even today if you want to give some additional consideration. The implementation of the pathways is also an important section on that FAQ, and there's some other pieces on there on the FAQ as well. You're going to see here that in these, there are some components that are higher education related. So bullet point number 3 really connects to that advising component. Bullet point number 4 connects to that equity component, both for students who are perhaps being offered classes based off of the type of district they're in, or even for the equity of students applying to institutions. In the other section, NCAA, a large component that all of us are considering, but also an important component and a question that was posed when I did some just general outreach to our colleagues about today's presentation, really came around the impact and the preparation for the ACT and the SAT. So we'll jump into that in just a few moments as well. So this is the website for the High School Math Pathways Toolkit. I wanted to start here first and foremost so that you all could see this and you could see kind of all of those FAQs, where they're located on here, and then jump into a few of the additional resources that are available. Some of those resources that are available, the general support statement from the Advisory Council that I mentioned briefly. Another important component in the public admission, four-year public institution admission directors had an opportunity to weigh in on these decision trees. You're going to see an example of that decision tree next, but an important component for all of you to visit this website and take a look at that decision tree, because that decision tree is what the Department of Education really is putting in front of students and families, by extension school counselors and administrators, to say, here's how a student can determine which pathway they may be going down. Additional information on this Math Pathways Toolkit is very specific to kind of the secondary side, right? Students, counselors, family, ensuring that they have access to all of that information up front. Additional components on here, if you were on the website and you're scrolling down this slide, course descriptions. There's some videos in the sessions yesterday and in the sessions later today, the course specific breakout sessions. There's some videos that are included there. There's a parent toolkit specifically for parents to understand this. There's a teacher toolkit for teachers to understand the areas of crossover and collaboration. And then again, some important information on the alignment of the math pathways to the ACT and the SAT. Again, an important component to understand that all of this is very much focused on the secondary level. The Department of Education has been really great in recognizing there needs to be more information about the impact on admissions and about the impact on higher education in general. So again, part of our charge is to be able to say, what is that impact? So this is the one example of the decision tree I was just speaking about. When this was first put in front of the four-year public institution directors, there was a lot of feedback about ensuring students understood the impact of these pathways if they were considering specific majors, especially in the STEM areas. So you'll see at the very bottom, and I selected this decision tree as the example because of the additions of the bottom, majors that require calculus. Yes, we want students to have flexibility. Yes, we want students to be engaged in the options that their district offers, but we also want to make sure students understand, even if there's an inkling that they may be interested in one of these type of majors or programs at our institutions, that they're the most well prepared that they can be via taking the appropriate courses. The item that I'm calling out on this example, because it wasn't included previously, is engineering specifically. So our four-year public directors, when they saw this, said engineering has to be on there because engineering is an important program at many of our institutions. So engineering specifically has been added so that, again, folks can understand what that potential impact is. So as we continue here, the additional resource that I want to share, this has been shared throughout the symposium a couple of times through a couple of sessions, so you may see this, but I wanted to share this especially for the reminder that districts have the choice as to which option they implement. Not every district is required to implement all of these. In fact, some districts may choose not to implement any of them. So an important component to remember as you're considering the evaluation of students for admission to your college or university, the alignment of potential careers is coming directly from the Department of Higher Education's alignment with a guaranteed transfer pathways. So also want to make sure you're keeping that in mind. These were intentionally mapped to those guaranteed transfer pathways that all of our academic affairs offices have been working on with, in conjunction, the Ohio Department of Higher Education. So I'm going to pause there, and I would love to hear from you all. You should have the ability to take yourself off of mute. But our first question really is, what specific questions may be beneficial from an admissions perspective for that FAQ page? So I shared the broad categories previously. I'm happy to pull those up again, but I would love to spend a few minutes just walking through what sticks out to you as you've been engaging in the symposium. What are those areas of continued questions that you've been thinking about? The impact on students, the impact on your relationships with school counselors. What's coming top of mind for you as you're thinking about these pathways? And then my responsibility back to the Department of Education is going to be able to help relay that feedback and saying, here's what would be beneficial if we were to think about an admission specific section on that FAQ page. And I am going to stop sharing just so that I can be able to see you and anyone who's coming off of mute. Looks like we have colleagues from a number of institutions of various offices, student success offices, College Credit Plus programs, math departments. It looks like some private institutions, maybe a couple of two-year institutions. I'm excited to see so many folks from two-year institutions because we have had two-year institutions. Columbus State was our representative on the advisory council. So it is great to see additional two-year folks engaged in the conversation. We haven't heard a lot from throughout this process from the two-year side on the administrative side. So would love to hear, especially from you all representing those two-year institutions, top of mind for you, what may be beneficial for you to think about from your perspective of open enrollment policies.
Hi, this is Heike from Cleveland State, and I guess was in regard to when a student does change mind on the pathway, and that ends up happening after that 12th grade, as an institution, what we would then be expected to offer in order to give them that algebra 2 that they had in order to get into the pathway, for example. Like, are we going to be expected to have some sort of courses that basically take them down that path and prepare them?
I apologize, Heike, you are breaking in and out. Could I ask you to repeat that question and perhaps even enter it in the chat? And then we'll bring you back on for some additional dialogue around that question.
Yes, I'll put it in the chat.
While you're adding that to the chat, I see Pamela has added a question about the alignment of ACT and SAT. In the chat, I am putting there right now a link to what the Department of Education has provided specifically for the alignment of ACT and SAT. You're going to see that there's information for each of the specific courses. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you're going to see that the one course that's not provided is discrete math or computer science pathway. This information really is designed to give you a little bit of insight into where those areas are included or are being prepared for via each pathway, and the areas that are not being covered in each of the pathways. So an important resource for you to have, an important resource to consider. One of our general questions that we have combined with ACT and SAT are specifically related to how many institutions will continue to offer test optional and flexibility in their policies for test optional. As one example, Ohio State is test optional for 2022, but we haven't made a decision yet for 2023. I know that some of our colleagues, for example, at the University of Toledo, have extended that, and it's been in process for a couple of years. Other institutions have never required a test score. And so it varies right now based off of the type of institution. And so I think ultimately, and Pamela, this ties in a little bit to your question, ultimately the impact of ACT and SAT preparation is going to be seen as institutions start to determine where their school policies will be moving forward around the requirement of an ACT or SAT. Thank you, Heike, for that clarification in the chat. Are higher ed institutions expected to offer courses for students who change their mind on the pathway, i.e. Algebra 2 for students who now need it? There has been a lot of discussion included around that. I am not the expert in that specific area. And so that is a great example of the type of question that I'm happy to take back to the Department of Education on your behalf. And then I'll be happy to follow up and include it if appropriate in that FAQ. But I think that's a great example of a question that we can put forward. Great. Let me just catch up through the chat, make sure I haven't missed anything. Folks who are joining in from, again, admission offices, College Credit Plus offices, math departments, are there other elements of admissions maybe that you have questions about that we can help to move forward as well? So any questions that are top of mind for you around what may need to be considered by your admission offices if you're not located in an admissions office? Any components that we can help move forward for you there? Well, great question. Will pathways be noted on the high school transcript? Right now, there is not a requirement for pathways to be noted on the high school transcript. Our hope in admissions, especially in admissions, is that schools will be encouraged to include the pathways that they offer via their school profile. That's going to be so important for us to understand, especially for institutions who are considering, in context of their academic environment, those courses that were available to them and those courses that they chose to take by various levels and by various pathways. That has been elevated as an area of opportunities for school counselors to consider. And I don't believe that's made it to the toolkit yet, but that's an area with this reminder that we'll continue to elevate to ensure we have information about how institutions who are evaluating students will understand. Especially, again, important because not every institution is going to offer the same pathways. So we'll want to make sure we understand what those are. Looks like another question has come in regarding Algebra 2 equivalent. Does that mean it's considered equivalent for admissions, but doesn't prepare students for the programs requiring calculus? That's a great question, Pamela, and a tricky question. The idea is that the courses are providing equivalent rigor based off of content of those specific classes. However, the curricular design may not prepare students for that calculus level or for those programs that may require calculus. So this is going to be a large component of discussion for school counselors to have with their students and families, especially if they're doing some early planning for potential careers. Now, of course, the pathways are designed to offer some flexibility so that students can move back and forth. That's an area of concern that's been elevated is, you know, at what age do students really understand where they want to be in the program they want to major in? And we also in admissions recognize that students change their mind for their majors even after they've submitted their application for admission. So that's definitely an area that is rising to the top as an area of concern. I hope that answers your question, but feel free to let me know if that doesn't. But essentially, it's equivalent in rigor, not equivalent in content. So again, that's why there's kind of in that decision tree example, the important call out for those STEM focused majors. All right. It doesn't look like there's a lot of other questions coming in at this time, and that's okay. I'm going to start sharing my screen again, and we'll continue on in our conversation. So let's get jumping back in here. So regarding the equity updates and the approach, the equity statement for Math Pathways has been designed and is being worked on by the architects group. The architects group, of course, are those members who are our math faculty from 2-year, 4-year, and secondary institutions that are coming together to define these courses and to highlight these courses. The guidance on maintaining equity is what's driving this, but it's really designed specifically for school administrators and school counselors to consider equity as they're thinking about which offerings they're going to have for their students. So our question to you all, and again, this was submitted by multiple folks in advance of our conversation today, is from an admissions perspective, an admissions office perspective, what recommendations do we need to consider we make, if at all, for students to consider, for school counselors to consider as they're making their decision? We know that there's a balance of rural, a number and a high number in Ohio, rural schools who may not have the same resources as a suburban school. We know that our institutions serve all types of students across the state of Ohio and from outside the state of Ohio. So anything that's coming to mind, top of mind for you all, again, feel free to unmute yourself and share that. Because again, this is the important feedback that we are able to provide to the Department of Education around this area. I'm giving you a lot of nuggets to start thinking about. After our conversation today, as you continue to think about these, I'm going to provide in the chat in just a few moments my email address. Feel free to reach out via email to me, share your feedback, share the questions that you've been able to think about, consider the FAQ section. We'll provide that link for you as well. But again, it's important for us to hear different perspectives related to admission so we can ensure we're providing the most appropriate information on these pages. So some impacts for consideration, again, some information that was submitted. Of course, we have some colleagues on the call from our great College Credit Plus program. Thank you for all of the work that you do in working with students and administrators on that program. One of the questions that has come up is how are these math pathways going to impact the availability for students to progress through College Credit Plus courses? For some of our competitive institutions in the state of Ohio, this has been top of mind, wondering if it's going to change the number of students who are completing AP coursework and who are completing College Credit Plus coursework. So that's top of mind as a potential impact. The question that was asked a few minutes ago around our schools going to indicate on their transcript the pathways that are offered. You'll see that that's listed here. What is the impact on transcripts? How might that be noted? What will be or not be included in school profiles so that institutions can approach that review in the most appropriate way? And we talked just a few moments ago about ACT and SAT preparation. I've provided that link for your consideration as well. So we'll want you to consider that in the conversation. All of these may help to build that FAQ for the toolkit. And of course, I just can't reiterate enough the importance of us being able to hear from you around what those needs may be for the toolkit. I wanted to share just a quick description of the courses as you're considering what your admission processes are, what the evaluation of students may look like. This was something that was requested specifically from admission directors, understanding what these courses are going to be, understanding what the content may be. All of these course descriptions are included on the toolkit page. So as you're having conversations via your administrators, your academic affairs offices, your provost offices, please ensure that you have these at the ready. We know that the course descriptions may not be beneficial for all institutions, but again, for a number of our four-year publics, this was a request that was made, and so we're happy to be able to provide this update in these quick course descriptions so that you all have a better understanding. As we come into the home stretch here, our proposed timeline for these, just as a reminder, a number of the pilot classes are in progress right now and are preparing to launch. Really, the impact for admission offices is highlighted on the second slide here. So in the fall of 2023, you should fully expect to see that students from these pilot schools are applying to universities, and that's when we're going to start to see some of those differences. So we're still about a year out from those impacts being seen on transcripts, but we did want to keep that on your radar so that as you're going back to your home institutions, having these conversations, preparing for these conversations, you are ready to go and moving those conversations forward. So 2023 is going to be an important date to keep in mind, that autumn semester. And you'll see that in 2024, it's going to continue. But now, instead of just students from those pilot schools, it's now going to be the entire state where we're seeing that impact. So the on-ramp for admission offices and their evaluation and consideration process really is now to consider what might we need to update with our systems, what might need to be on our radar for impact and for training leading up to the 2023 cycle. And then you'll have a little bit of an on-ramp and a roadmap then for the statewide preparation of seeing those courses being changed on those transcripts. So thank you. Let me again stop sharing my screen. I'm going to check the